The Nintendo 64 was $99.99 in the year 1999. Let's go over these old nostalgic games. First of all, this is an ad from KB Toys, which was one of my favorite stores growing up. It was pretty much the mall version of Toys R Us, and you can get games, toys, you name it. It was the place to be. Now I'm going to first start off with the Nintendo 64 up here, which was $99.99, which had the controller. You had the clear purple controller, which that aesthetic is something that I miss until this day. You had your standard gray controller, which was what most Nintendo 64s came with. But they also included a free Rumble Pack / memory card with it. But for $99.99 in 1999, how much does that cost? $184. Now, if you scroll down to Star Wars Rogue Squadron and Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time being one of the best games of all time, and Rogue Squadron being a pretty solid racer back in the day, $39.99 in 1999 was $73 in 2023, or is $73 in 2023. That's a lot of money. And it's interesting how when we compare these inflation values to things, you realize how expensive games were back in the day. I just think it was something that was more accepted because of how new console gaming was and just how sought after some of these games were. But in actuality, a lot of stuff was just as expensive, if not more. The Game Boy Color right here, $79.99, translates to $147, which, I don't think sounds too bad. I feel like the consoles were scaled pretty well, but by then these consoles had been out for a couple of years as well. Once again, this was sometime in the middle of 1999. And let's just talk about how amazing the colors were, especially for the Game Boy Color. I just really miss that fun aesthetic that 90s electronics had. They didn't care about playing around with these ridiculous colors. Like, you could have a yellow, a purple, a greenish. You could have all sorts of stuff, see-through, and all of it was cool. It all had a unique aesthetic to it. Last but not least, you had the Pokemon games. Red, blue, and it looks like yellow hadn't come out yet. $29.99 a pop. Translates to about $55. A little bit more standard and down the line. But keep in mind, Game Boy games were usually a lot cheaper than your other games. So it's interesting how these scaled. Game Boy games were a little bit cheaper to make, more than likely. And so you usually had that $29.99 price tag for stuff. But in actuality, gaming was still fairly expensive back then. I just think it was just a newer thing, and console gaming was starting to have its surge. The 64, the PS1, the Game Boy